Hi, guys. I am your host, Ashley from Candidly Connected. And today's topic is one that seems to affect us more and more as our kids are getting older. We are at such a complicated time in our parenting right now, right? Whether it's phones, tablets, or whatever, technology is being introduced at a younger and a younger and younger ages. And we still don't understand the limitations of this. And I'm finding myself in so many conversations lately about the use of phones and screen times with our kids. And even my children are right at this age where they're starting to become more common. And I'm feeling lost about how to broach this topic with my kids, as I'm sure many of you are too. So if this is where you are today, if you want your kids to be connected with their friends, but not become robots, or know how to use technology, but not forget how to play, this is me too, and you're in the right place. And I'm so excited for our expert guest today, Andrea Davis from Better Screen Time. Thank you, Andrea, for coming.
I'm excited to be
Andrea,
here.
yeah. Andrea Davis is a former secondary ed teacher turned screen time navigator. She is the founder of Better Screen Time, where she shares family tested ideas from the tech trenches as a mom of 5. She's on a mission to help parents worry less about tech and connect more with their kids. If you've been around a while, this is me. I love the connection is lifeblood, right? It's everything we need with our kids. So I'm so excited for you to be here today.
Yay.
So before we get started, I always think it's important to note that the purpose of these episodes is always to just share information, answer some questions that are coming up in the Candidly Connected community. And as always, you get to decide what works best for your family, even if that is the opposite of what I share today or we share today, even if that is the opposite of what I've seen work for me. You get to choose always. So let's start talking about screen time with maybe the younger ones. So video games, YouTube for our kids. Because what I'm seeing, is we all love to veg out. Netflix is my go-to at the end of the day. It's my wind down, right? Um, so it makes sense that we assume that our kids are kind of the same. But I know with my kids, after I've let them wind down in that way, it's harder to get them to cooperate. It's harder to get them to engage in anything. So I'm curious, what do you suggest to parents who are using screens or tablets, whatever, as a way for their kids to wind down maybe after the day or anything that's been overwhelming, but they want to start having them engage in more connected activities or hobbies?
Yeah, well, I always say that while technology has changed, what kids need has not. So my background is in secondary education. I taught school before I stayed home with my kids. And, as we look at child development, what kids need and what we need to be human and for healthy development has not changed. And so the biggest risk that we run when we are giving our kids too much screen time, they're spending too much time on a screen or maybe seeing content that's not appropriate for their age, then, especially talking about the time, we're running the risk of them having missed opportunities. So getting those things that a healthy child needs, like adequate sleep, physical activity, face-to-face time with a real person, um, developing those fine motor skills and hands-on activities, being able to be bored and know what to do with that time. All of these things are critical skills and just the foundation for a healthy life. And so if we are just allowing our kids to always turn to a screen during downtime, then they're never developing those skills of resilience of what is it like to go out and ride your bike and fall off and skin your knee and have to get back on. And so I think it's really important for parents of younger children to think of the big, long picture here of what kind of human do I want to raise? And I want to raise someone who's resilient, who is a critical thinker, who can problem solve. And unfortunately, kids aren't learning those skills on a screen. Those skills are learned in real life, in real time, and falling off a bike and playing at the playground, and even getting, having a play date with your friends and not agreeing about whose toy it is. Those are necessary life skills of learning to work with people, and we just can't learn those on a screen. And so I think that's important to think of the long picture.
Yeah.
And it's so beneficial when you have like little kids to be able to teach them other ways to unwind. And just, I think that the environment is so important. That's something I talk about a lot, is like, what are the things that your kids are seeing, at the end of a school day? Are they seeing a pile of books, or is there a tablet there? And like, we're going to gravitate toward the things that we see. And so with parents of younger children, that's a huge part of it, is just creating an environment where your kids are seeing the things that you want more of in your life, really.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, in the sense of, like you're saying, like even thinking in my own life, my kids come home and there is a TV in the living room. It's off, but I mean, even having the pile of books, like that's so simple to just shift certain things in your environment to allow them to see, you know what I mean? Like not having the TV in the playroom, or just the expectations not even there when it's not available. And I love that, the fact that just what you said about the tech has changed, but what we need hasn't. That simplifies it so easily for, I think, for parents to be like, that's so true. Like our human development hasn't changed from when we were kids or our grandparents were kids. And so it's important to keep that going and not fall into these tech habits. Also the boredom part, I think, I don't know if it's fear necessarily, but when our kids are bored, it's like we have to fill it somehow. But you're right, when they're never bored, they don't learn how to pick up a guitar. They'll never kick the soccer ball. They'll never discover these things that maybe they're going to fall in love with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's not like, oh, we can never turn to a screen, but what works best with younger kids is to make it routine and regular, so that maybe there's a specific day of the week when you're using screens, and always having a specific time. Because the other thing that we need to realize is that the kind of technology that we're using today does not have stopping cues. So the technology that I grew up with, I'm 45, so I'm definitely like child of the 80s, early 90s. We had like 3 TV stations. I knew what time my favorite show was on. I went and watched it, and then it was done, and you turned the TV off and you moved on. Technology today does not have stopping cues like that. So as parents, we have to provide those stopping cues. And so it's really helpful to have a conversation ahead of time, like, okay, I think an hour, a couple times a week, that feels good for our family. What are some days? And you can do that when your kids are younger. And then you can make a list with your kids of like, what are all the other things that we love to do that we can fill our time with? And kids are definitely going to come, and a lot of them, and beg for more time, or try, and they're going to tell you, I'm bored, there's nothing to do. That's okay. Like that's how they build resilience. And I want parents of younger children to just see, like, we have a youth mental health crisis happening right now, and there are a lot of factors to that, but one of the factors is that, like, these kids have not been able to be bored or know what, or to be resilient and do these things. So it's like screens are just like an easy escape, right?
Yeah.
And also, it's not just about the screen, but it's about those missed opportunities of getting interaction with people face to face, and lacking sleep and all those things like that contributes to our mental health. So we're talking about development. We're also talking about the long term. We want like mentally healthy kids. And, there are a lot of factors there, some that we can't control, but there are some that we can't control. And that's what we have to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. That long term. And what you said about the stopping. So what do you suggest when it's already an addiction? When you have a 9-year-old or an 8-year-old or whatever, who is already very addicted to either a video game or their whatever it is, how do you suggest pulling back to those parents who maybe are scared to start?
Really, a lot of what works with younger kids is for you as a parent to decide, how can I, what can I do to change this up? And what are maybe some things that I can provide or have to replace this bad habit? Because really, there's addiction and then there's also just kind of bad habits too.
Right.
But what can I do to replace this addiction or this habit? That can be connection, like time with a parent. It could be another activity. It could be having a friend over and, having some certain games and things available. So just kind of planning ahead, like what are some things that we could replace the screen time with? What are some times a day when I, as a parent, I'm maybe super stressed or tired and I am using that screen as a babysitter, or it's just like the easy thing to do? What are some things that I could plan ahead of time to prepare for that time of day?
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is just mindset, like
Yeah.
mentally preparing and then physically preparing your environment and your home. And then you prepare your child. Like, you know what? I just realized that we've been spending way too much on screens. We used to do a family movie night, or we used to go on a walk after dinner every night, or maybe there's just some things that your family used to do. And I think it's really helpful when we come at it with a team approach. We're not pointing at our child and saying, you were a bad kid because you're spending all this time on screens. Oh my goodness. Like, as parents, that's almost 100% on us.
Yeah.
So it's like, how could we do
Mhm.
things differently so that we make sure that we're spending time together, that we're getting enough physical activity? And I think when you point to these things that are necessary to help us be happy and healthy and connected, then we're not just like demonizing the tech, but we're just like, oh, it's replacing all these things. So what are some
Yeah.
things we can do? And then at that age, honestly, you can put the tech away. I've had parents who've like given their iPads away, or they just go put it in the closet, and it will be rough and hard for a week,
Yeah.
maybe a couple of weeks. It will
Yeah.
be hard. So I think you just prepare for that. And then at that age, your kids will totally adapt. I've watched it time and time again. I watched it, with my own kids when we've had maybe phases where we moved or where I was pregnant and maybe my kids had more screen time than normal. But on a given day, my younger kids just don't use screens hardly at all. And there's just other things here that they turn to. And so I've
Yeah.
just seen that we might have these ebbs and flows in life, but there's always a way to turn it around.
Yeah. And I think it is important to note that, I mean, if you're listening right now and you're thinking, I don't have time to set things up, or I don't have it, we're not saying that it's going to be easy. Like you said, it is going to be hard, and it might take a little bit of extra work on the part of the parent, thinking about things they might be interested in that. But it is going to become default. It is going to become easier because it's going to become easier for your child to pick up that guitar, or they want to go outside. So we're not saying it's going to be easy right off the bat, because it's definitely not. It's change. It's change. It's changing a
Yes.
routine, and that's always going to be hard right off the bat. But it will get easier, and the long term, like you've been saying, it's the long term that you're looking for.
Yeah. And it's so worth it. I mean, it's just amazing. It's so rewarding when you can see your kids just like go outside on their own, or just pick up a
Yeah.
book, or grab the Magna-Tiles out of the closet, or the Play-Doh, or
Yeah.
drawing, and it's cool too, because like, as I've watched my kids grow, so my oldest is in college now. I have two in high school, one middle school, one elementary, but like as I've watched my kids grow, it's awesome to see them gravitate to those things, and pick up those things on their own, because
Mhm.
it's just the routine, right?
Yeah.
And so it does take some work, but it's so worth it.
It's so worth it. Okay, the next thing I want to ask you is kind of from me. So sorry, listeners, if this isn't something you're interested in. But I've seen you talk recently, especially about not using screens as rewards. And knowing everything I know about child development, right? We're all human. And sometimes I find myself in this trap. And usually it's like, when your room is clean, then the show can come on, or then you can watch a show. And I know in the moment, it's not what I want to be doing. But can you speak a little bit about why we should steer clear of putting screens on a pedestal in this way?
Yeah, well, really, it just gives the screen too much power, because then it's always about the screen instead of just and it's not that we can't reward ourselves with something, with an activity, and then it couldn't ever be a screen, But it's just when everything revolves around the screen, either rewards or punishments, then that's what the kids are focusing on. So I think like the real trouble happens when we see like these screen time charts where it's just like do all these things, and then at the bottom it says then you can have screen time. We're like just giving the screen so much power and making that the be all end all. But really what we want instead is like, yeah, there are certain expectations in our house that, you know, everybody needs to help do. And when those are done, then we can move on and do other things. So again, with younger kids, maybe there are a couple of days a week where when those things are done, screen time is the activity that we move on to. And that's okay. I think it's when we hang the screen time like we dangle it like a carrot.
Yeah.
And we say, and we're always talking about it. Like when you clean your room, then you get screen time. If you do this, then you get screen time. If it's like a part of our daily conversation and how we're always encouraging our kids to get stuff done, that's when it becomes a problem because we're actually creating this habit loop. I'm a huge fan of just like thinking about habits. And I love the book from James Clear, Atomic Habits, but thinking about this habit loop. And it's almost like when we are saying that to our kids, we're creating this trigger. And then it's like, okay, I do this thing. And then the reward is the screen time. So then it's like this habit loop that we are creating.
Yeah.
So it's just like, let's get our room cleaned. And then what's something fun that we could do when you're done with that? So maybe on one day, it's a day of connection. Maybe it's a crazy day and you don't have, 10 minutes to sit down and play Uno or whatever that is. Then maybe it's like we could get out the Play-Doh or we could get out the Magna-Tiles or we could call a friend to come over. Like I think you can give choices and kids love choices.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be screen time, but maybe sometimes it is. And that's okay. It's not like we can never give them screen time. But if we're using it every day and we're always talking about it, we really are creating this cycle on our own.
Right. Yeah. We're not saying it's an all or nothing. It's the in moderation and when are like actively thinking, when are you using it? What are you using it as? Yeah. I think that is important to think that it's giving it power. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And then our kids are like, oh, the screen, that's the thing
Yeah.
we always want,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's what I need right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So what about when we're moving into smartphones? My son is 7 and believe it or not, they're already talking about them at school. I can't believe we're here
Crazy.
already. I can't. And one of the concerns when I'm talking to parents, whether clients or kids at school, parents at school, whatever, is that they're giving them now as a form of communication, as a form of, well, they're going to the park on their own now and I need to get a hold of them. If they're at their friend's house and I need to be able to contact them, whatever. What are your thoughts on that? And what are some alternatives instead of kind of starting the smartphone at that age and also still being able to get a hold of them? It's kind of tricky because like my generation, you went to the park, you came home at a certain time, but now we have this like need to always be in contact. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So first off, really asking ourselves, is it a need? And quite often, like with younger kids, are they really at the park by themselves for a long period of time? So I would question that first off. But with like maybe a 8, 9, 10-year-old, then maybe they are. And, I think it's just a matter of like, are they in a safe space? Are there other people with them? Is there just a way that we can communicate ahead of time and they know when to come home? Another great option is just there are watches now that do not have any internet access on them. Now I know you're in Canada, and so there's perhaps, I know there aren't as many options there as there are here in the US. So that is something that parents would have to do some research on. But, there are watches that can call like 10 numbers and they don't have internet access. And that's like a good option if you think they really need to communicate with you. But I think that for the most part, we're doing our kids a favor by communicating ahead of time, and hopefully they're just in places where they're safe and there's other people and we can communicate with friends, parents that can also communicate with us through their phone. And I think that, it is tricky because a lot of us have taken away our landlines, but I think having a phone at home that doesn't have internet access for emergency is really helpful. And we have something like that here in our house. But, I have a son that's 12 and does not have a smartphone. And so, and I have a couple of high schoolers that have smartphones that don't have internet access on them. And so my approach is definitely to delay as long as possible, because every parent says, I wish I would have waited. And it's so true, because it's a slippery slope. And sometimes people are like, well, I'm only getting it for them so they can call. But if you're giving them a smartphone that's got all the other things on it, like pretty soon they are going to start begging and asking for more and more. I call it technology creep. It's kind of like lifestyle creep, but it creeps up on you. So it's like the earlier you start, you have to realize you are taking on a huge responsibility. And I know that from experience. And that's why Better Screen Time even exists, because I handed over a smartphone too soon to my oldest, who was 12. Again, it was for the practical reasons, for like, we had moved across the country and I wanted her to stay in touch with these old friends. And I wanted to get in touch with her in this new place where we were living. And I learned very quickly that it was too much too soon. So we went back to a brick phone, and I'll never regret that. And that really, led me to helping parents understand this. But we want to let our kids be kids and have a childhood. And once they become tethered to a device, such an attachment. I live just a block from the middle school, and I see kids walking to school all the time, just with their faces glued to the phone, not watching where they're going, not paying attention to anyone around them. And they're still kids. I mean, I taught junior high before I stayed home with my kids, and like, they're still kids at that age. And so it's just, be really mindful. We have an evaluation on our website. It's called Am I Ready? So when kids do start asking for a phone, you can go through that self-evaluation and then really ask yourself, like, do we really have a need? And if not, just wait. You'll never regret it.
Yeah. And I think, like, even when you're talking about building up those skills, I think that's a really good question for parents to ask too, that if you're not in a place where you trust them to go to the park by themselves, in the fact that you have to give them a phone, or you have to communicate, or you have this need to contact them, is their trust really there in that they can handle any situation at the park? Whereas if we're saying, okay, what do we do when a stranger comes up? What do we do? And you're prepping those, or what do you do when you fall off the monkey bars? Or if you're building those skills up, then you kind of get a trust as a parent of, okay, they know what to do. They're going to be okay when they go to the park by themselves. So it's
well, and I think
interesting.
something that people are really overlooking now is that your kids have way greater chances of getting groomed online by an online predator than they ever do being encountered by a stranger at the park and getting kidnapped. Like, by far, the percentage is so much higher of kids getting groomed online and ending up in these horrible situations where it's called sextortion, and these predators are asking for images of your kids. They're pretending to be your kids' ages. They're getting these images, and then they are telling them basically, if I don't get this much money by this point, I will share this image, all over online, or I will tell your parents, or, and like, that stuff is happening way more than kids getting kidnapped at the park. So like, we just need to be mindful of, like, what are the real dangers here? And yes, we need our kids to be safe physically. Make sure they're in a safe place, that you do know where they are, and that someone is checking in on them. But just being realistic about what the dangers are out there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I never thought of it that way, that what are the real dangers here? Yeah, that's really good. So what about, you talked about how you gave your phone to your 12-year-old daughter and you had to take it back. What is it like, or what do you suggest to parents who are in that phase of, like, I need to pull back here, but your teen, like, this is how they connect. This is how they talk to their friends. This is, I think parents, even for myself, I am totally 100% on board. Don't want to do smartphones, want to delay as long as possible. But there's this part of me that, well, they're going to be left out. Kids, I
Mhm.
have a 15-year-old niece, they communicate on Snapchat, they communicate through this, like nobody talks through text. So how do you handle that fear of your kids are going to be left out if you have to pull back or if you just delay?
Yeah. I mean, I think we just again have to be realistic and think what are the benefits versus the risks? And remember, what else will your kids get left out of? They'll get left out of bullying. They'll get left out of drama. They'll get left out of online predators. They'll get left out of pornography. They'll get left out of sexting, out of news, sextortion. I mean, addiction, gaming addiction. Like I could go on and on of the things that your kids will get left out of if you delay a smartphone. And so that's the thing. Like, can my child, can we find a group of even a small group of friends that maybe we're texting on a basic smartphone that doesn't have internet access? So again, in the US, we have several options. I don't know exactly what's available in Canada. I mean, it might just be a simple texting phone, but there's this phrase that says, like, maybe I'd rather have two quarters, than like 50 pennies. And so like maybe we're connecting with hundreds of people online, or we're connected to like all our peers on Snapchat or whatever. But are those people going to have your back? Are they going to be there for you when really things are hard? Or do you have these couple of friends that maybe you text that are going to be there for you on a hard day, that have your back? And so, that is hard. It is hard to be left out. I mean, my daughter, she's in ninth grade. Her health teacher asked just a few weeks ago, like, who here does not have social media? And she was the only one out of a class of like 30 kids that raised her hands. The only ninth grader in that class that didn't have social media. And that can be hard. But the thing is if you instill in your kids, like help them identify their values, and you let them know, like, here are the dangers on social media, here's the dangers of being attached to a smartphone. Like, you're kind of educating them along and deciding as a family that we're just going to take this slowly. And again, there is no magic age for a smartphone or for social media, which is challenging. But we do know the US Surgeon General said, he even thinks that 13 is too young for social media, which is something I've always said. It's just a complicated place. It's very unregulated. And, there's just a lot going on there. So we want to let our kids, not only develop those skills, but really figure out who they are before we're unleashing the world to them. And so, yes, they will get left out. Like they will. My kids have been left out of things, but they haven't been left out of having good friendships with a few friends that are the kind of friends that they hang out with. And, and that all of that, those things will come. They'll all have time to jump on the social media bandwagon if they want to, or whatever else. But again, I think it doesn't mean that we can't give them any tech, but like, let's keep it to where we're connecting with a tight knit group. We don't need, hundreds of connections with people that are kind of just distract us from living our best life, really.
Yeah. And I think that just the way that you put that, the choice, or you're teaching them at such a younger age, a lesson that I, like, as me personally, didn't learn till you were 20, that you do only need the 4 or 5 friends that are really close with, that are going to have your back, instead of the 200 people that show up on your Snapchat every day, that maybe you
Yeah.
don't have somebody that's going to have your back. And I think having that lesson as a teenager, instead of learning it the hard way when you're in your 20s or 30s or whatever, is a huge gift that
Yeah.
you're giving. Yeah.
I mean, and I, as an adult, now ironically run this social media account to share this message with the world, of better screen time. I get hateful messages. This still can hurt my feelings and can be, I have to like work through. And I'm like, I'm a grown adult with a
Yeah.
fully developed brain. And so it's just like, yeah, no wonder we have a youth mental health crisis. Like, that's rough on kids. They're
Yeah.
getting these mean messages, or they're getting contacted from strangers. And it's a lot of complicated stuff on these platforms. And so It's just like, and even like, I've talked about a lot about social media, but even like gaming, the line between social media and gaming is really blurred now, just because people can game with random people all over the world, right? And there's always like lots of chats going on. So gaming can very much have that same element as well. So just being mindful of that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely assessing the risk is the big takeaway that I'm hearing. Before we go, what are your thoughts about, and I know even when I'm coaching clients, the most common thing that comes up for parents is, well, how do I get my partner on board? How do I get my partner to shift parenting styles? And the short answer is you can't really.
Yeah.
I mean, so my usual answer is the way that we shift them is they see what is happening in your relationship with your children and they say, oh, I really want that. How do I get that? But as for telling somebody how to change, that's never going to work, right? So what do you suggest to the parents that are saying, well, I'm on board, I want to do this, but my partner doesn't. My partner's always on their phone for work for whatever reason. How do you handle that? Because obviously everybody in the house being on the same page is what's best, but not always what happens.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree with you. You can't change someone else. And this kind of goes along with what you said, but I always just tell people, like, be the change you want to see, right? It's that famous line, but really modeling the tech habits you want to see. And so I think before we start telling other people how to live or how to use their phones, we definitely like just get clear with our own tech habits. What are some things that maybe we want to change? And when we sat down with our kids to create a family tech plan many years ago, after we'd gone through this whole phone incident and had to go back, I was like, okay, let's do this right. And so we sat down to create a family tech plan, which is something that I recommend to everyone listening, is to have that conversation, but kind of what will either come out during that or that you need to do prior is, again, like, get clear on some things that you need to change. So we decided at that point as a family that we were not going to take screens into the bedrooms and bathrooms, which really, again, I've got older kids. It wasn't a problem for so many years because portable screens weren't mainstream, but then they started to be. And so we had to take a different approach. One of the first things my kids said were like, well, Mom, you take your phone and your laptop into the bedroom. And I was like, oh, you're right. And so at that moment, I committed to not taking my phone and my laptop into the bedroom. And, that's been over 5 years ago now. And I've stuck with it. You can ask my husband, like, I never take my laptop or my phone into the bedroom. And I've had so many benefits from that. Like, my bedroom is a sanctuary for me now. It's a sanctuary from work. It's a place to connect, and connect with myself, connect with my spouse. And so I think that's something I've been able to share with my kids and, with my husband. And thankfully my husband's, really good about it and really isn't attached to his phone, but I know it's a struggle in many, partnerships or marriages. So I think it really is just like experimenting, trying some things for yourself, and then share that with your spouse or partner. Be like, I quit taking my phone in the bedroom, and maybe they'll even notice, like, oh, you're actually talking to me instead of scrolling social media on the bed or whatever that is. So, like, whether they notice it or whether you have to point it out and just say, I love that we have time to talk at night now. And I think especially if it's benefiting them in some way, that, like, you're investing in the relationship, that's always helpful, right? And then you can kind of go into, I've been thinking a lot about what I want our family to look like when it comes to tech. And I've been doing a lot of reading, and you can share like some of the things we've talked about on the podcast today or any other research that you've done on the topic. Just, whatever that is that you feel like. I love it. You said at the beginning, like, parents need to use their own gut and their intuition to kind of decide, like, what do they want to change after listening to this? Because it's definitely up to you. But, what do you kind of feel motivated to change? And then the next step would be to sit down and create that family tech plan, which we have a quick guide on our website. And it's just a quick guide to creating a family tech plan. So people can download that. It's free. And it is just one of the best ways to get clarity on how your family is going to use tech. And it was where we started. And I highly recommend that. And it will help your spouse or partner too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If parents are at a stage right now where their partner is not ready to commit, they're not ready to put the phone down in the evening or whatever the reason may be. I mean, there's millions out there.
Yeah.
Do you suggest that the one parent will it will still or could still be successful for them to go ahead on their own, following it with their children and themselves while the other partner doesn't follow? Like, could it be, it's not necessarily an all or nothing thing. It could still be successful.
Yeah, I think so. But the important thing would be to have a conversation with your spouse or partner prior to that
Mm,
and just ask for their support. Like,
yeah.
hey, you know what? If you don't want to jump on board and follow the boundaries that we're going to create, that's going to be up to you. But could you support me in this? We're gonna sit down and have a conversation. And sometimes what happens is the kids bring things up, highlighting things about a certain parent, and it depends on the parent's mindset. Are they humble enough and willing enough to accept that maybe that will be the catalyst for change, that their child is noticing that they don't pay attention when they're talking to them, or that they're always on their phone at dinner, or, whatever it is. Because I have heard that, and especially well, just really from moms and dads, just kind of saying it took my kid telling me that, I'm always on my phone for me to want to change. And so, you're just going to have to be mindful of where is your partner at, where is their mindset, but could they at least support you in this? And sitting down to have that conversation with the kids just might be what they need to make that change.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is a less pressured angle too of, I'm going to do this. Can you support me? And there's no expectation there. Also, if you're listening and your kid has told you that you're always on your phone, I've had that too. So you're not alone.
Yes.
I'll be playing baseball with my son and he'll be like, would you just not pull your phone out of your pocket? I'm like, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
and for that, it is just like, I've learned it's just better out of sight, out of mind. So we have a charging station in our office, and I use that quite faithfully now, of trying to keep that in there when I'm at home. And, I've just quit taking my phone in my pocket when I'm in the house. And obviously, like when I'm out and about, I'm putting it in my pocket because that, got to take it with you. But if you go to the park, try leaving it in the car, just those kinds of things. And it just makes it easier. And it's not like none of us are trying to be bad, negligent parents, right? It's just a distraction. It's a distraction. So if you can remove that distraction, then you don't have to choose between your kid and your phone.
Yeah. It's like the opposite of what we were saying with presenting books instead of the TV. Like, just don't have it there and you won't check it. It's a good reminder.
Yeah. And none of us are going to be perfect, right?
Yeah.
But it's just, you start thinking about it and you start to make those changes, and eventually it does become habit.
Yeah. I am so grateful for this conversation. I think for anyone that's listening, when we were saying, you got to choose what's best, I think the big takeaway here is assess the risk. What is the risk? Whether it is giving them the phone for communication, going to the park, or starting to give smartphone, like whatever it is, assess what the risk is and make the choice based on the information that you know. So if parents are starting to feel overwhelmed in this process, what do you, how am I wording this question? Where can they find information with you to that family tech plan, and maybe working with you if that's something you offer? How can they get supported through better screen time?
Yeah. So if you just go to our website, betterscreentime.com, you'll see there's a link, at the bottom to join the newsletter, but there's also just like a free downloads. I think it just says downloads at the top of the website, and you can pick and choose. There's so many options. Like there's one called A Better Babysitter, where it is geared more toward parents with younger kids, of like, here's some things to do instead of handing your kid a tablet, And then we've got the quick guide to creating a family tech plan. That's really where I recommend the parents start. It's a quick win. Again, you sit down, have a 20-30 minute conversation with your kids. It's a really great place to get started. I am ironically on Instagram as well at Better Screen Time.
And if you're not following her, go and do that, because I love your delivery. I love how it's like bite-sized. It's just information that you can take in. It's not overwhelming. It's just perspective. Like I didn't know that or whatever. So I think the delivery that you give is really important. And the fact that you're a mom of 5, like if you can do it, come on, we can do it.
Yes, we all can do it. It takes
We can do
work,
it.
but that's my goal, is to help.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that it's helpful.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on, and follow Andrea at Better Screen Time on Instagram, and you won't be disappointed.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks, Andrea.